telling Prabhakarji that I remember telling Prabhakarji that Dr. Shiv Shastri joined this group that I anchor, group of writers and poets. He had joined the group, and I told Prabhakar, there's this doctor who's come, and he's written this book on this Indus Valley civilization and the entire myth behind the study. And Prabhakar said that, I've been using his research in many of my talks. So I'm very happy to be able to put them together in this conversation today. A quick introduction of Dr. Shiv Shastri. He is a general and laparoscopic surgeon. He did his MBBS and MS in general surgery from Jitmere, Pondicherry, followed by FRCS in Edinburgh, the UK. Outside the field of medicine, Dr. Shastri has maintained an interest in military aviation and strategic affairs for over 50 years. From 1997, he was the administrator of the world's biggest Indian military website, bharatrakshak.com. He's written 2 books, one on Pakistan and the other entitled Tearing Down the Aryan Invasion Myth. He's currently working on a book recounting 40 years in surgery. He's also taught himself 3D modeling as an aid to telling video stories of air battles in his YouTube channel. He's got a brilliant mind. He's got a brilliant 360-degree mind. And now I welcome him to this conversation, and I hand this over to Prabhakarji to take it forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rukmini, for bringing Dr. Shiv Shastri here on the show. And it wouldn't have happened but for the incredible connection you have with him through the writers group that you have. That's so active and so inspiring. So again, I would just say that it's an honor and privilege for me to have him here live in this discussion, because many of the things that I speak about in Mandala Vatika, about the Saraswat civilization, I have culled from his book. And when Rukmini told me that he is the one and she has access to him, I said, please, I mean, we'd be honored to have him here. So Dr. Shiv Shastri, welcome to this show. And I would like to start by asking you, there is this whole discussion about whether this mythical river, it was called the mythical river Saraswati, ever existed. And your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you very much. It's such a great honor. I'm flattered. Thanks ever so much. There's a lot to talk about. I have 2 minor objections. First, to the announcement I got on WhatsApp about this particular group, this interaction between the 2 of us, and what you just said. The first thing is the mythical river. It's not mythical. The second thing is the expression Aryan race was used, and there is a problem with that. There was no Aryan race. So, well, since you asked me, I have a short presentation. I'm not sure whether we should start it now. Perhaps we should start it a little later when we actually start talking about the Saraswati civilization. There's no river now. At this point in time, there's no Saraswati river now. However, more than 100 years ago, maybe 150 years ago, several British explorers and scholars used to wander around in the areas west of Delhi, in Punjab, going down south towards the Rajasthan desert. And there were several areas where there was a minor river. Sometimes the river was had water only in the monsoons, and it was called the Saraswati River, or the Sarsuti. It was pronounced Sarsuti. And more commonly it was called the Gagar Hakra River. The curious thing, of course, was that along the course of this area, there was a very old, enormous, huge riverbed, in some places 6 kilometers wide. And this riverbed had a number of ancient settlements that had been abandoned. So, this has been on record for over a century that there was something here, some kind of river here, and there were settlements there. Fine, this great. Okay, so in fact, the biggest settlement eventually ended up being in Pakistan, although it was in India at that time. Mohenjo-daro, I think that's 540 acres. So it was discovered there. So it was, called Mohenjo-daro. And there was another place called Harappa, Harappan civilization, it was called. So, what is the connection with the Saraswati? Just because somebody calls it some people call a small river a Saraswati, the Saraswati doesn't mean that there is a Saraswati river there. So, what is the evidence we have that that we know there was a river there? What's the evidence that it was the Saraswati river? So, there have been scholars. Let me give it to them. I'll call them scholars, although I have objections to their writing. They said there are Saraswatis in other places as well. There's a Saraswati somewhere else. So it could be any one of those. So what makes this riverbed the Saraswati river? One thing is the people say it was Saraswati. The other thing is, there's a passage called the Nadi Stuti in the Rig Veda, which lists rivers in the exact east to west geographical order. So you have the Ganga or the Ganges, the Yamuna, which goes through Delhi, and then there's the mention of a Saraswati, and then there's a mention of the Satluj River. So now we have a Satluj now, we have a Yamuna, we have a Ganga. There's no Saraswati in between, but that sort of gives a hint. So one could always say, okay, if you look at translations of the Rig Veda by Griffiths, the Rig Veda was never meant to be translated literally, and unfortunately, as Aurobindo himself says, these translations read like a bunch of insane people because it has no meaning. So you could well say that this Nadi Stuti means nothing. They just put in a set of names from east to west, that is Ganga, Jamuna, Saraswati. They put Saraswati there. So here again, it's only a hint that there was a river. I think the real proof, to my mind, comes from the fact that there are actually written and known records, particularly see in Manusmriti, in Manava Dharma Shastra. The Saraswati River is, it speaks of an area of northern India called Madhya Desha. Okay. Now, what are the bounds of Madhya Desha? Madhya Desha, to the north are the Himalaya mountains, to the south are the Vindhya mountains, to the east is Allahabad or Prayag, and to the west is Vinashana. Now, Vinashana is the place where the Saraswati River dried up. So here we have some, this is not the only proof. There's some in the Mahabharata as well, others as well, giving the same geographic coordinates with the Himalayas to the north, the Vindhyas to the south, and some landmark, maybe Kalakavana or something, Prayag in the east, and once again, Vinashana in the west. Vinashana, Vinasha is something that disappears, that goes away. So we know of a river that was drying up when these passages were written. So this, there is no other Saraswati river, no other river called the Saraswati that has these coordinates, exactly these coordinates, where the Saraswati is supposed to be. So this is, to my mind, is the clearest proof that there was the river there that we know is there was called the Saraswati. Now, what else is there? It says in the Rig Veda, this was a mighty river that flowed from the Himalayas to the sea. So what is the proof? Well, there is scientific. We know it's a mighty river because in areas it is 6 kilometers wide. What is the proof that it flowed from the Himalayas? There is actually isotopic proof. It's not difficult nowadays. Well, it requires some technology. You need to drill holes in the riverbed and take samples of rock. So what they've done is they've drilled holes in various parts and taken samples of rock, and they've done what is known as oxygen stereoapatite studies. That is dating of the oxygen molecule. You can't do carbon dating. You have to do something else. So it shows that these rocks actually came from the Himalayas. And it shows that, the deeper layers, the rocks came from the Himalayas. The later years, the rocks came from the Shivalik hills, which are further south, which are not really the Himalayas. So there was originally flow all the way from the Himalayas to the sea. I don't think there's any doubt about that at all. That is the Saraswati River. and there was a huge, huge civilization on the Saraswati River. I would be happy to, discuss this further and answer more questions if necessary. But let me throw it back to you and say, if, because there are various directions in which I can take this, and sometimes I don't stop talking if I get a chance. So
Thank you so much, Dr. Shiv. So essentially what you're saying is there is no doubt that the river that existed once, the mighty river that existed once, going all the way to Lothal in Gujarat, where we had the docks, where we had shipyards in those days. This is actually the name of the river. There is no doubt it is Saraswati. Yeah, that's. I think that is a great. I know you've gone into incredible depth in your book, where you have actually done a lot of studying how these coordinates refer to the Saraswati River. So that's a great piece that we have, for to kick off this particular discussion. Now, what I would want you to give us a little glimpse of that extensive research you have done on this myth of the Aryan, for the want of a better word, race. I know you really detest that term, and you have very good reasons for that. So if you could sort of tell us who these people were. Who were these Saraswat people that lived on the banks of this mighty river so many thousands of years ago? So if you could throw some light on that.
Yeah, okay. As you know, I've written an entire book on this, but let me start from the beginning. Why was there denial? Where did this question of an Aryan race come up? So, excuse me for a minute. I will mute myself and cough and then come back. Sorry about that. So, we need to go back to the centuries when Europe was expanding and started colonizing various parts of the world. And back in those days, the various European powers, they were exploring various parts of the world, and some explorers went to, this area that's called Assyria. Assyria is sort of southern Turkey, Syria, Iraq area, and they found these magnificent ruins, absolutely fantastic ruins. They found texts as well. And what really, got them upset was the fact that these ruins fitted in perfectly well with the Old Testament. Now, the problem with this was, Europeans were all Christians, basically. And they didn't have much love for Semites, the Jews, basically. And this is all on record. I'm not making this up. There are references that speak of this. So, they were really upset that, the Semites had this very ancient civilization, extremely old civilization. So they were, they didn't like it. They wanted to find something that showed them that their civilization was greater. After all, because as per the history that they had for themselves came mainly from what the Greeks told them and from the Bible. And from the Bible, basically they were the descendants of Japheth. Noah, the Noah's Ark had 3 sons. He had Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Now, Ham, of course, apparently Ham, the son Ham, saw his father Noah naked. Perhaps he was having sex. I don't know. Nobody says that. But Noah cursed Ham and said, all your descendants are going to be slaves. So Hamites, all the people who were slaves, the Africans and the other, dark people were all Hamites. And the sons of Shem became the Semites. So and these were the Jews and nowadays the Arabs. And the descendants of Japheth were the Christians. And this just wouldn't do, with this old thing. So that was around the time they came to India. Now, it happened that, once they came to India, they learned Sanskrit. And they learned Sanskrit from the priests who were, reciting the Rig Veda. And it was from Sanskrit that they realized how all the European languages were connected. This whole concept of Indo-European languages came after, this epiphany occurred after they, learned Sanskrit. And then obviously, Panini's grammar was very advanced. The science of grammar, the science of pronunciation, neurolinguistics came from originally from Panini's work. And now once again, the Europeans didn't, well, not initially. The Europeans said, okay, these people who are dark in color, they couldn't have invented this. So actually, it was white people, a race that came from Europe, conquered these people. And the language came from Europe. And in fact, there were theories that the language came from Sweden, came from Germany, came from here and here. Finally, they settled on some in-between area, the Eurasian steppe or something like that. So this was the thing, because Europe was doing exactly that. They were going and civilizing Africa. They were civilizing South America. So they said that this civilization of India had taken place a long time ago. Our ancestors had come here. So how did the word Aryan come up? Now there is a word in the Rig Veda that is, it is frequently used. It's called, no, not frequently. I think, I'm not sure if it occurs how many times, 22 or sometimes, the word Arya. Now Arya, the word Arya is something like, in today's society, you have mechanics, you have engineers, you have teachers, a group within a society. Okay, it's not a race. It's not, you don't have a race of teachers. You don't have a race of mechanics. So Arya were a group of people who followed a particular, way of life, ritual and things like that. And then, there was another set of people which the Europeans used. They called Dasyus, and they said that these were black people whom the Aryans hated. This is complete nonsense, So what they did was they took this word Arya, they added an N to it and said Aryan race. And I keep repeating this. I put this in my book as well. For example, you take the word Sundari. Now the word Sundari means beautiful woman. If you add an N at the end of Sundari and make it Sundarian, you don't get a race of beautiful women. It just does not exist. But what these linguists did was to take the word Arya and said, look, hey, looky here. I like this concept of Arya. This was us. Arya is us. Aryans is us. And so they put the word Aryan and said Aryan race. And these Aryans came and pushed off the, the black. Black was a problem. Hamites, so impure. So they pushed the Dravidians down south. So this whole business of Aryan race and Dravidian race was cooked up by them. And unfortunately, the remnants of that are still there. Not only do people think they are Aryans, we have political parties who think they're Dravidians. And I have shown, and I'm still writing about it, I've shown that even the linguistic conclusions that separate Aryan and Dravidian languages are wrong. And we will come back to this at a later stage when we talk about, I think you had, we had a little discussion about what the language might have been in the Saraswati civilization. And so here again, we come across this problem of Aryan and Dravidian and things like that, which is controversial. Here, the Europeans came here. They told these Indians, hey, all you guys who are fair, you're Aryans, and the guys who speak these languages are Aryan. Those are Dravidians. You go and you sort it out yourselves. And we've spent all these years trying to sort it out. So here we are. This is what it is. This is where the word Aryan came from.
Right. So, I like the way you've just given the gist of what is there in your book. And I think primary takeaways, Doctor, is that the word Arya meant a certain way of life.
Yeah.
There was no such thing as Aryan and Dravidian at all. It was a concoct.
No.
Since the Europeans came and saw something fascinating, they wanted to make it their own. They put an end to it and called it Aryan race. We were here. So we are the guys who brought all the good things to you. And, so you are the Aryans. And then you've got those black guys who are also your sort of, the second leg of
also Rands.
You sort out that, So
Yeah.
there is a certain way the West sort of usurped an ancient culture with so much to offer to the world. And very interesting what you said about they discovered their own roots of the European languages only after they learned Sanskrit. It was only when they learned Sanskrit did they realize how their own languages had evolved, because this was the mother root of that. And they couldn't give the credit to this part of the world. So they sort of shifted it to some sort of a Eurasian steppe, or, somewhere in the Russian, Central Asian plains or something like that, so that they take it far away from the Saraswat Valley, right? So I think these are beautiful, beautiful pointers, and it makes us so much aware of the fact that why we need to reclaim that heritage. There's so many of us who miss this. So I think you left that on a very interesting note. But at this time, I wonder whether you would like to recap what you said with a few slides from Rukmini. Would that be in order at this point?
This is probably a good time. It talks about, no, before that, can I just come to one thing before I go to the slides? Where does the Saraswati civilization come into all this? You see, all this theory of Aryan and Dravidian, all these things were made up before Mohenjo-daro was discovered. Okay. So, everything was hunky-dory, everything was fine until these fellows, these busybodies, these guys went and found this huge civilization. Now, here's the problem. Now, how do you explain this civilization? So then, they had to scramble to explain, already the point is they had given, they had dated the Vedas as Sanskrit language as starting in 1500 BC. Okay, this was a completely fake date, and I can come to the proof for that is in my book, and there are various proofs for that. So they had given a date of 1500 BC, after which the Rig Veda came, and then the Indians, the Sanskrit, the Rig Veda, and the languages came after that. And because European languages are even more new, you look at the oldest evidence of Greek, it doesn't go beyond sort of 800 BCE or maybe 1000 BCE. Oldest evidence of Latin doesn't go very far. And most European languages don't, they look for proof. The proof is not there at all. And no matter which way you look at it, looking at European dates, looking at the dates made by European linguists, still Sanskrit ends up as being the oldest. Okay, so they tried to bring up other languages, Hittite, and I won't go into those details at this point in time, trying to say that 1500 BCE is the date. Now, here's the problem. Now, there's this stupid big civilization along the Saraswati River, which is much older. It's older than 1500 BCE. So they had to find some kind of excuse for it. So then there was this denial that this is pre-Sanskrit, it's pre-Vedic, that, in fact, these were, then, they started cherry picking words from the Rig Veda. The Rig Veda's got a word, pur. They say, these were the pur. That is to say that, that whole theory is actually quite amusing. So this complex, these thousands of stanzas of the Vedas were apparently composed by people on horseback who were busy conquering and killing, and they came and destroyed this whole civilization. And then they started a pastoral life over there. I mean, this is complete nonsense. And a few skeletons were found. They said, see, dead bodies. So they must have killed them. So there has been this distortion of history. And unfortunately, see, the thing is, it's like this. You go to your doctor, okay? And the doctor leaves a forceps inside your belly. He's responsible for it. He's answerable. Recently, there was a bridge collapse somewhere. Some engineers have built the bridge. Now, the engineers are responsible for it. There has to be accountability. But linguists and historians, no accountability. Especially you go back 200 years, they can say pretty much anything they want. They put all their work into history books, and now it's the word. It's written there, and we've got to believe it. And they've just cooked up left, right, and center this whole business of language coming from the steppe. They had to cook up, forget the fact that the language PIE is cooked up. They had to cook up the language Proto-Indo-Iranian to say that a Proto-Indo-Iranian came towards India, and they had to cook up a further language to say one side was Sanskrit, other one was a Western. So there is no such language, but I won't go into that. So what happened is this was inconvenient. This whole business of the Saraswati Sindhu civilization was inconvenient for them. And that is why you have all these nonsensical arguments that it was not there, it didn't exist, Saraswati was somewhere else, it was broken. So we are actually fighting against 200 years of written history. This is the problem. Now we can come to this the slideshow, if it's okay. If you start with, I have a few slides there. Okay, see this is I actually see, let me just see. I've forgotten those. Yeah, see, these are the historical records showing the the Madhya Desha with its bounds, the Himalayas in the north, the Vindhyas in the south, and Allahabad, Prayag, and Vinashana. The only thing that's to the left of that, before the Indus River, is the desert, is the Rajasthan desert and the Cholistan desert in Pakistan. And the Rajasthan desert, the Cholistan desert is exactly where they have found this huge riverbed, which shows evidence of water flow from the Himalayas to the sea. So it's just to the west, to the left of Madhya Desha. If you go further left, you find the Indus River. So between the Indus River and what is marked as Madhya Desha, this is where the Saraswati River is. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Yeah, if you go online, you can find lots of maps of the Saraswati. This is something that I had done. These are the places. Patiala, right to the right, this image on the right side is Delhi. Then to the north, west of that is Patiala, which is in Punjab. You have all these places, Hanumangarh, Anupgarh, where the Gagar Hakra River runs. Bahawalpur is in Pakistan, is the center of terrorism at this point in time. So, this is the blue is where the Saraswati River used to run. This is the approximate course in case anyone wants to know. Next slide, please. Okay, this is an image. I've taken these images from various presentations and things. This is an artist-generated image showing what the houses were like, what the civilization was like. There were streets, there were drains, and there was this beautiful, very well-planned cities. And there are thousands of sites, but only 6 or 7 sites are more than 50 hectares. So one could only say that there were 6 or 7 urban centers, and the rest of them were actually small settlements or villages. Next slide, please. Yeah, I deliberately selected this out of hundreds of photographs. This is a toilet. And you find that no open defecation. They had toilets, they had drains, and there was a little pot for water for cleaning. So I thought this is absolutely amazing. Next slide, please. Okay, and then there was this knowledge of mathematics, this knowledge of geometry, of how they've drawn a circle inside a square, and they've drawn non-overlapping circles in order to get this beautiful pattern. And this pattern occurs in all sorts of places, as you will see in the Saraswati Sindhu civilization. Next slide, please. Here you can see the same pattern on the on the floor. These floor tiles, you can see this beautiful pattern. It's perfectly geometrical. And the other thing that's seen here are the bricks. Now the bricks again had a standard size. They had a 1:2:4 ratio. So this 1:2:4 ratio was, has lasted for many centuries. I think at some later stage it became 1:2:3, but at this point in time when this was done, it was 1 is the thickness, 2 is the breadth, and 4 is the length of these bricks. Perfectly standardized. Next slide, please. Okay, the level of technology was absolutely amazing. Gold, of course, is a metal that melts at a relatively low temperature. So, and is very malleable. So they had gold jewelry. A remarkable thing are these 5 centimeter long carnelian beads. These are absolutely amazing. These are 5 centimeters, 2 inches long. It's probably as long as my index finger. And they've drilled holes through it. It's extraordinarily difficult to do. This is stone after all. Either it'll crack or you'll go off to the side. And the level of technology is absolutely amazing. And apparently these were very popular. And these have been found as far away as Iraq. in Mesopotamia. These 5 centimeter long carnelian tubes have been found there. Next slide, please. Okay, now here are these microbeads for necklaces and things like that. Just look at it, 1 millimeter in length and diameter, standardized size. Absolutely fantastic. You see the sort of, the workmanship. This is not being done by some guy who was riding on a horse and chopping people. This is done by a settled civilization. Next, please. Okay, this is an electron micrograph of a bead with silk fibers. Actually, there's another image which shows an enlargement of those silk fibers, which actually proves that it's silk. The interesting thing here is, if you look at Wikipedia or things like that, it'll say that silk actually came from China. No, the silk fabric in the Saraswati civilization are contemporaneous with Chinese silk. So dating back to 2500, almost 3000 BCE. So that was evidence of silk. There was evidence of cotton as well. I don't have a photo. You have these, you have woven cotton fabric imprints on clay tiles and on pots. Next slide, please. Okay, and toys. They had these beautiful toys. I deliberately selected this particular toy because, a large number of excuses. The thing is, if you tell one lie, you got to tell 1,000 lies to cover up that one lie. So once you tell a lie and say that the Saraswati Sindhu civilization was the very civilization that Aryans came and knocked down, then you got to find lies for everything else. There were no wheels, there were no horses, there was no civilization, all these things. So this toy shows it's absolutely marvelous. I would like to play with a toy like this. But no one makes them anymore. We get only plastic nowadays, unfortunately. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, this actually may be the last slide. Weights and measures. So you can see that actually it says there that the smallest weight on the right side was 0.856 grams. And then, it went into binary, double of that, and so on. So the 16th ratio when you get up to the top. So, you're talking about a civilization that was settled, and it was exporting. There are actually, the thing is, sea levels have risen since that time. And there have been ports on Makran coast of Pakistan, Baluchistan, and in Iran, where the Saraswati Sindhu seals and jewelry have been found. And then it goes all the way up, like I said, to Iraq, Mesopotamia, Syria, and Israel. So these, these are not, the thing is, it's not that these are not isolated things. There was this huge swath of territory where this thing was going on, from Baluchistan in the north. And it's not surprising, the thing is, now one more, Indians particularly, we Indians have been gaslighted into thinking that, these were a primitive bunch of fools. Actually, this area that is called Afghanistan and Baluchistan all get mentioned in the Mahabharata and in old Indian texts. So, you have Gandhari, the princess who came from in Mahabharata. Gandhari is from Kandahar. So, you have Balika, you have Balk. Balk is a known area. So, all these areas were the greater civilization that was there. So it was a huge, well-developed area, and nobody was killing anyone. It was just, life was going on fine. It was a time of peace and time of development. And this is much I can say about it. I'm done with the slides. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I mean, it's beautiful. So there were some takeaways which were very, very significant. I thought one was the level of technology. Yeah, the level of technology, because even those extrusion, what look like extrusions, obviously these must have been created at very high temperatures. So
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. There's a thing called faience. Now, faience requires very specific temperatures. I've forgotten what the temperature. I don't know if it's 1200 or 900 degrees. If you take a hearth, actually people have done studies of hearths in the Indus, in the Sindhu, actually in Pakistan. If you take a wood fire, it reaches 340 degrees centigrade. If you take a mixed fire of dung and wood, it's something lower than that. For faience, you need something close to 1000 degrees centigrade. So it's remarkable. You need to control the temperature to actually produce that. Sorry, I interrupted. Please carry on.
No, it was actually your that slide which was there. So, and the way they used to drill, I mean, there are even other references where you talk about, dental fillings and things like that. I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, this was obviously, like you said, not somebody sitting on horseback going lopping people around. I mean, that's I think there was no doubt about that. And I think you left this in a very interesting take on this, because when you showed that picture of artists' recreation from the excavations of the settlements, the very large settlements, more than 200,000 people used to live in some of these urban centers. One of the things that strike people, and I'd like you to give your thoughts on this, unlike any other civilization in any other part of the world, we find a very egalitarian space. Everybody seems to live in almost the same size buildings. Highly evolved people spiritually, but no temple. Very disciplined people, but no king. There is no palace. And everything seems to be, it's some sort of a civilization that one can only dream of. And yet these people lived that way. A few thoughts, Doctor, on that egalitarian nature that you find in as evidence from the excavations.
If you ask my personal opinion, the only way you can create such a society is to start with a philosophy that teaches you about what is right and what is wrong in life, and what is uh, uh, how human life should be led. It requires I think you have to what shall I say, preload this human software with a degree of spirituality. And I believe, it is my personal belief, that this, if you look at, this spirituality, basically, how do you find spirituality? How do you find it? If you destroy not destroy, you look at Bangalore 5,000 years from now, they're only in ruins. Where do you find spiritual? How do you find it? You might find buildings, you might find bridges, you might find rusty cars and things like that. So, the point I want to make is that this was a civilization that had the right software to live like that, and they continued to live like that until finally it was actually nature that made them move from from that from that area. They moved further northeast once the Saraswati River started drying, and then the actual invasions, the real invasions, the killer invasions came much later. They came around 200-300 BCE. That is the time, for maybe 500-400 BCE. And these by that time, the Saraswati civilization had already moved on. It had moved on by about 1500 BC. So, it was 1,000 years later that 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 armies, marauding armies, came there. So it's absolutely remarkable. See, they find skeletons. Skeletons have no injuries. They're not no broken skulls, because there are many areas in the world where you find mass graves. You find people. You find you find bodies lying in awkward, bizarre positions. A hole in the skull, a broken arm, or a knife in between the ribs and things like that. Nothing like that. Nothing like that. You know, there are only a few burials. The few burials of whole bodies, because apparently there was a mix of both cremation and burial. They would cremate and then put the bones in a pot and bury that. So that is one reason why. And then, yeah, you asked me a question which I didn't address at all. There's a, even now in the last few days there have been papers. There's a man called Pradeep Chaubey and Neeraj Rai. I know both of them. They're geneticists. They've worked on the genes of that have been found in Rakhi Gari and other places. There's no doubt whatsoever these fellows carry the same genes as we do. And this all it connects up together. Why do I say these carry the same genes as we do? Because there has been, geneticists have tried to prove their theories that there are certain caste genes. It's a load of nonsense. It's all mixed up. And the same mixing up is true for the languages, but even the languages, there is really no major differentiation that the linguists made between the so-called Indo-European languages and the so-called Dravidian languages. I say this because I've written a paper and I'm actually working on it further. Linguists use a particular way of finding relationships between languages. They look at what are known as cognate words. They pick up cognate words, cognacy, and then they look at the grammatical similarities. And no doubt about it, there's a lot of grammatical similarity between Sanskrit, Hindi, Marathi, and all the so-called Indo-European languages and other European languages. No doubt, Russian, Western European, no doubt about it. But why? Why have these so-called Dravidian languages, the South Indian languages, been pushed away? Because you will know as well as I do, with both of us being from South India, we from the South have always protested, saying, especially Malayalam. Now, I think Rukmani is from Kerala. Malayalam is chock full of Sanskrit. Malayalam is all Sanskrit. We people from Karnataka, Andhra, it's all Sanskrit. It's full of Sanskrit. Tamil too has very close connections with Sanskrit. So, there was a man called MNO who came up with a theory of what he calls a linguistic area, what he calls a Sprachbund. Sprach, I think that's how it's pronounced in German. A Sprachbund is an area where different languages have interacted for thousands of years. So, you have this, the sharing of words and, memes and things like that between the northern and southern Indian languages. And when I use the same methods that linguists use, the methods that linguists use to connect up Indian languages with European languages, when I use that with South Indian languages, the connection with southern languages is more than with European languages. I have tables, I've actually published this online. So, we have some serious, we need to look at linguistics seriously, because the amount of rubbish that has come in linguistics is amazing. Sorry, I've digressed.
No, beautiful. You weren't digressing at all, doctor. But what you say is very beautiful here. You are saying if we use the same tools which study connections between languages, the linguistics, and make a matrix of sense of the northern languages, northern Indian languages with European languages, and use the same tools to see the connection between northern languages and southern languages, you find that in the latter, it is much more connected, which means
yes,
this question of Aryan and Dravidian is a concocted statement, because it just wasn't there. And I think we have here a very intelligent question that was posted by Rajshri Patel, one of our very, very senior art of living, pioneers of art of living. And she says, what makes the people who lived in the valley adapt foreigners' ideas of you light-skinned people are Aryan, dark, Dravidian, and you sort it out, particularly when the society was so advanced? A beautiful question, Rajshri. But I think what Doctor here was saying is, 5,000 years ago, this society had no doubts about its
Yeah.
identity.
Yeah.
It did not
That-
have a identity disorder. Who am I? It was very, very sure who they were. We are talking about in the recent couple of 100 years, where people have come and given us these ideas that, there is the Aryans, which originally came from Central Asia, which also progenited the other European, races and things like that. So this advanced, highly advanced civilization had no identity crisis. They were very, very clear about who they were, and they lived as such. And it's also interesting, your question raises, therefore, at some point, when did we lose that innocence? And Mandala Vatika, as you all know, is about that innocence, yeah? Going back to innocence. So at some point, whether it happened because of the earthquake in the mountains and the river dried up, there was mass migration, maybe knowledge was lost, ways of life were lost, and then we became a ritualized society which had nuggets of wisdom, but we just sort of kept reciting without really knowing the content. We don't know. But at some point, there has been a disconnect between that innocence of that Saraswat Valley and who we are today. And of course, the Mandala Vatika by Gurudev is an attempt to revive our connect with that. So I think, to answer your question, a very interesting question, it's not that civilization who had any doubt about it. And even our present society, maybe it was taken on the wrong track a little bit by these so-called gaslighters. But I think people like Dr. Shiv have very quickly put it back in perspective. And I love the fact that you brought up the genetics, because I think DNA mapping is a very, very clear indicator of who we are. And I think that really puts a full stop to this entire myth of this Aryan invasion and, all this, whatever they came up with. I think it's very beautiful the way you have brought this in. And I really love the way you used a beautiful phrase here, that there must have been a programming in the brains or minds of these people, which obviously must have been rooted in some deep spiritual truth for them to have lived like that. Because your book refers to the fact that they were really like, I mean, what would be my nearest comparison? A hive of bees. Each bee knows exactly what to do, and they all live. I mean, they all live in the moment. They all live, completely aware of who they are, what they are doing, what they should be doing, and in total peace. Like you said, those little weights and measures. Those numbers, 8, 5, 7, and then the double of that. This is actually serious mathematics. I mean, we are talking about very, very, very serious mathematical relationships. Can't be done by somebody who's sitting on a horse going chopping people. This must have been a very settled society. The other thing that I read in the book is, unlike many civilizations, we don't have this concept of making tombs. Every society seems to revere the most important people by making tombs for them. But here, everybody was equal. So nobody made tombs for anybody. And you said there is very little, burial as such. They cremated, and whatever bones were there were kept, and that's about it. And it's all very, very peaceful. Now, another very important fact is, there is a certain disconnect. And in Mandala Vatika, I really focus on this. Being so evolved, this particular society, what do you think, Doc? Did they practice taboos, do's and don'ts? For example, vegetarianism. What is your take on this?
Prabhak, a lot of nonsense is going on nowadays. I'm sorry. I'll come to vegetarianism in a bit. Okay. This whole business of, were they white? There's no such thing. This society had no such thing whatsoever. Okay. It's very clear about that. Now, when you look at the remnants of animal bones, you find that certain sets of animal bones that include cattle as well, yes, pigs, goats, they all have knife markings. Okay, that means the human has cut them. They used to eat meat, they had no problem. It's food, let's face it. And if I'm sorry to say, the sort of people I interact with, my own friends online, because I have a fairly solid presence in social media, and there are certain things that that people don't like to hear. But the fact is, these people, they had no such taboos. They would eat meat, and if you look back, at our own Puranas, our stories, which all came later, as the ritual and stuff came later, but still these are a record of our civilizational memories. And yeah, sorry, it's very easy to digress, but you find that you have these princes who go and kill a deer. Why are they killing a deer? They're not killing a deer for sport, okay? Or fishing. They're fishing for eating, because these are there in our stories. So there was no such taboo.
I really like the way you brought it up. And this is what we keep saying in Mandala. By the way, I mean, I'm not promoting meat eating here. I'm not saying that at all. But if you do go to Bali, for example, Bali has remnants. If you want to see Hinduism frozen about 3,000-4,000 years ago, if you want to see it in a frozen form, you go to Bali, because there you will see a very, very spiritual society. They have the deities, the Trimurti, Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu, but they will pray to the Prajapati, which is the like the Brahman, and yet they will eat wild boar or pig or whatever. I mean, it's never been that, because even when you take agriculture, for example, they might have eaten the meat, but every other part of that animal, they would make formulation. Kunab jala is a beautiful formulation which they used to make to grow their plants, to grow their crops. So it was meat which was fermented, and then the bacteria would form into that, all the nutrition would come into that, and they would actually pour it in their fields, and they used to do that. So it's very interesting to have a society where there were really no do's and don'ts, because everybody knew what was right. And I love the way you said, some programming, basic programming was there, in the minds of these peoples. That programming was there. And it is that programming which must have been based on a very high spiritual truth, and that's why in Mandala Vatika, we talk a lot about this. We talk a lot about this, not to get caught in the ritual of so much of discipline, do's and don'ts, but Mandala Vatika transcending that, going straight to that innocence, that childlike innocence with which these people must have lived. It must have been a great, great society, Doctor. It must have been a great society. Yeah, please.
Sorry. No, see, if I may interrupt. The Vedas were Shrutis. They are called Shrutis, as you know. So transmission of knowledge was all oral. The sound was important. Even, the meter and the chanting is important. Okay. The Shruti, the sound going into your ear is important. So, and when you talk about this Saraswati Sindhu civilization that has no, at least apart from seals, no, written texts are not a problem. They may have written on perishable materials. So a lot of the knowledge would have been transmitted orally. A lot of these things are transmitted. And the fact is, we don't seem to, we, at least in India, we have forgotten. In India, we are now struggling to make a good aero engine. Now, aircraft engines are manufactured only by a few companies here and there in the world. And it is knowledge that is given from person to person. The final, yes, you have the calculations, you have the thermodynamics, you have the alloys, but the final treatment of the alloys, the final thing is done by word of mouth. That is the important thing. So the reason why we don't have any sort of written evidence is this, because ultimately it is human transmission that lasts the longest. And I'd actually written an article about this. Books may last 300, 400 years maximally. Stone, yes, it lasts a long time, but nothing else. Even CDs, you find them dying in about 15 years or so. So there's nothing like the best thing is transmission. So the spiritual, this audible, auditory, oral transmission was the original way of keep getting humans together, transmitting knowledge. And I suspect that is what was going on in the Saraswati Hindu civilization. This is my feeling.
Wow. Thank you so much, Doctor. It's been such a enriching, enlightening, discourse by you and your sharing of what is, and I urge every one of you to read his book. It's a fascinating book. At least it's been my source for a lot of things that I put in Mandala Vatika. And therefore, I have the honor of personally thanking Dr. Shiv Shastry for the knowledge that I am transmitting to a lot of you. And we are almost precisely on time as always. And last few minutes, I would like Rukmini to take the stage and sum up vote of thanks and whatever else she would like to do. Please, Rukmini.
What Shiv has done is, all of us are victims, outcomes of what a bunch of people with vested interests, they may be journalists, who knows, politicians, but they wrote our history books. And we really are the victims of that. And many of us have grown up studying deeply into a lot of theories created by recent historians. And it's because of people like Dr. Shiv Shastry, who've done hours and hours, days and years of research, that we have suddenly, the window has opened to us to explore what could have potentially happened. And he has given historical evidence through a huge amount of research documentation that is right now becomes the beginning of an entire study for us too. So there have been about 162 people here on this group with us. And for each one of us, it's time to start rethinking our history. Talking about it, speaking to our children, speaking to people that we talk to, and challenging a lot of these concepts that we were raised believing very strongly in. Shiv, thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I'm sure this will be one of many where we will engage you. And Prabhakar, you were amazing as always. And easy for me to say that because I'm married to him. And for the rest of you who are all here today, thank you for being with us. And do take this with us. Take this back with you. See what else you can think about on this and keep the story moving. A different story, but this time. Good night, good afternoon, good morning.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rukmini. I mean, and again, our entire team thanks you because you were our connect with somebody as world-renowned as.
It's my honor. Yeah, I'm honored. Thank you. I need to thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you once again. On the dot, 9:30, we close. And once again, thank each and every one of you for being a part of this enlightening discussion. We'll share the recording. Please watch it and do share it with others. Jai Gurudev.